Hey guys, it's Miss McClellan, and today we're going to talk about the causes of the French Revolution. But before we do that, we need to sort of set the stage and figure out what life was like in France before the revolution even started. So for a really long time, France had been governed by a monarchy. Okay, and a monarchy is when you have a king or queen, a monarch, ruling a country, and they basically rule until they die. They didn't get elected, they didn't get appointed, they just had the job because they were born into a royal family. France was an absolute monarchy, meaning that the king or queen had all the power. None of the people, nobody but the king had a say in what happened. So you can think about how this is making the people in France really angry and frustrated, that they didn't have a say in anything. Some long-term causes of the revolution in France, the power of the king, the nobles, and the church. This means that for a very long time, if you weren't a king, if you weren't a member of the nobility, meaning like the top tier of people, the people with all the status and money, or a leader in the Catholic Church, you didn't have any power. King Louis XIV ruled France for 72 years. His son, King Louis XV, didn't have any interest in being a king. So his grandson, King Louis XVI, became king in 1774 when King Louis XIV died. King Louis XVI, this one right here, that's who we're going to be talking about during the Revolution. Like I said, all the power and influence belonged to the king and the nobles, the people in the highest class, and the church. They had special privileges, like they didn't have to pay taxes. There was only a small middle class in France. The rest was a lower class, but they all had to pay taxes. So the people at the top had to pay the taxes, even though they were a very small percentage. And this system, where you had all these people at the top, a small number at the top with all the power, and then everyone else at the bottom, it's called the Ancien Regime, and it's just a term referring to sort of the way that France was structured socially, the way that people were organized. This is a political cartoon that we'll talk about in class. We're going to skip that one. Some long-term causes of the French Revolution, things that have been happening for a long time. Another one is the regional divisions and financial troubles. So we talked about regionalism last semester, where people identify more with their region than with their country. France was different in a lot of ways. You had different laws in different regions. You had different languages. Some towns and cities had like traditional rights that didn't apply to other places. So people weren't really united that way. Another reason is financial troubles. France was broke because they had been fighting a war with Great Britain. They had also been helping America fight their war against Great Britain in the American Revolution, so they were spending all this money on war and they were broke. They also had poor harvest. The farms weren't doing well, so people were starving and food prices were going up, and people couldn't afford to buy food. The king and the nobles didn't really care about this because they weren't facing the same problems. And they were sort of seen as like snobby and out of touch because they had no idea what was going on and they didn't really seem to care. Marie Antoinette was King Louis's wife, and people really, really disliked her because they saw her as very insensitive to the issues of the poor. She's famous for saying, "Let them eat cake." And that was her response to someone telling her, "Hey, people are starving out there, they don't have bread." And she said, "Well, let them eat cake instead." So she didn't understand the issue that people did not have food to feed themselves and their families. Another long-term cause was the Enlightenment. And that was a new movement during the 1600s and the 1700s where these philosophers like John Locke and Rousseau would present these big new ideas about the government and the rights of citizens. It was sort of a radical thing at the time to say that it's the government's job to protect people and protect their rights. And so those ideas kind of spread around through France and other places and inspired people to revolt against these monarchs that were controlling people in every way. Some short-term causes, things that had happened more recently but still really contributed to the revolution, was the tax system. So I'm sure you all remember that France had 3 estates. Okay, these are their social classes, their groups. You have the first estate, and this is the clergy, the leaders of the Catholic Church. This was only 1% of the population. They did not pay taxes. They also owned a lot of land. The second estate, the nobles, the people with lots of money. This group was 2% of the population. They paid very few taxes. Then you have the third estate, and that's everyone else, literally everyone else, doctors, lawyers, teachers, merchants, peasants. This group was 97% of the population. Every single person in the third estate paid taxes. So you have the people at the top, 3%, have the most money, but they're not contributing anything. They're not paying taxes. Yet the group at the bottom, 97%, is paying all of the taxes in France. So it's also pretty obvious, I think, why this would make the third estate, in particular, pretty angry. So the Estates General. King Louis was well aware that things were not going well. He could tell that people in France were dissatisfied and that something needed to change. So in 1789, he called a meeting of the Estates General, and basically that was a meeting where representatives from each estate came together to talk about problems. This was the first time that the Estates General, that meeting had been called since 1614, so it was a really big deal. So all representatives from all three estates came together and listed out their grievances, their complaints, and each estate got the same amount of votes, which, when you think about it, isn't necessarily fair because the third estate has so many people, yet they still got the same amount of votes as the really small first and second estates. Eventually, the third estate demanded that their amount of votes get doubled, but it still wasn't necessarily fair or equal. So at the Estates General, like I said, each estate wrote a list of cahiers, grievances, okay, complaints that they had for the king. Here's what we want to change. As you can imagine, the three estates agreed on very little. They did agree on the need for a constitution, freedom of the press, and an end to internal trade barriers. However, that's pretty much where the agreements ended. The first and second estates did not want to give up their tax privileges, meaning they didn't want to start paying taxes, and the third estate wanted them to start paying taxes. During this meeting, the King Louis, he showed really weak leadership, meaning he didn't really step up and go one way or the other. He was kind of seen as a weakling, okay, a scaredy cat. He didn't really take a stance and provide the strong leadership that the people of France needed. Because of that, and because the estates couldn't agree, the Estates General was deadlocked, meaning no progress was being made. Every time they voted, the first and second estate would outvote the third estate because they essentially had the same amount of votes. So the third estate, the 97%, the common people, they're getting really frustrated that no change is happening. So they break off from the Estates General and they form their own group called the National Assembly. It's just another group where they come together and they try to make some changes to address their concerns, their complaints. Well, this makes King Louis mad. He sees this as a threat to his power. He says, you can't go behind my back and do something like this. So to get back at them, he locks the door to the room where the National Assembly was meeting, preventing them from meeting. Instead of giving up, the National Assembly went to a nearby tennis court where they basically had 576 people swear an oath not to leave, not to separate, not to disband until they created a new, fairer, more equal constitution for France. And this is, of course, called the tennis court oath because it literally happened on a tennis court. So you've got all these people meeting, talking about creating a new constitution. They pledge their loyalty to the cause of the revolution, and there starts to be some fear that King Louis is going to get mad about this, and he's going to send in the French army to stop this group, this National Assembly. So lots of people go to Paris to sort of show their support. Like, we stand with the National Assembly, we support what they're doing. As you might imagine, when lots of angry people are gathered together, some violence, some riots break out. And on July 14th, that should be a J, 1789, violence broke out and crowds stormed the Bastille, which was the name of a prison. It actually only had something like 7 prisoners inside of it, but the people were storming it because weapons were being stored in the Bastille. So all these people stormed in to steal the weapons to defend themselves against the king's army. It was a very violent, very deadly event. They brought the Bastille to the ground. It burned to the ground. All those defending the building were killed. But this is considered the start of the revolution because the people who were revolting had some weapons. They had a legitimate way to defend themselves against the king. And on July 14th in France, that's Bastille Day. It's kind of like their July 4th, their Independence Day, and it's celebrated to this day. So some groups, just kind of to tell you about what the different groups were once the revolution had started. Sans-culottes, they were one of the most radical groups during the revolution. They were named this because of the type of clothes common to workers and craftsmen in French cities, especially Paris. They wore plain pants rather than the expensive, like knee-length pants that the wealthier classes wore. They were working class, they demanded democracy and equality, and they were willing to use violence. They were very, very radical. In addition to the sans-culottes, you had a group of peasants who got very angry and began to seize property from landlords and stole from stores. So it's just really mass chaos and violence all across France. Some nobles, the people at the top with the money, began to flee France because they in order to persuade monarchs in other European countries to help them prevent the revolution. They're saying, okay, we need to get out of here and get some help. Things are getting out of hand. We need to get kings from other countries in Europe to help us keep this revolution down. All right, so that does it for now for the causes of the revolution. Make sure that you have written your summary and that you write down any questions you have to ask me at the beginning of class, and have a great day.